Welcome back, everyone, to Neighbors in the Network. I'm James Pinedo, your host. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Arianne Craig Jolla. Arianne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, James. I'm excited about our conversation.
So am I. So am I. I was researching a little bit about all the amazing things you do and have done. I found out about your book too late, or your most recent book, too late to order it before this, but it's on my list now to read. It looks
Oh, yay,
fascinating.
that's awesome.
So we'll drop links to everyone about these books later on so that people can hear more about these amazing things. But before we get started hearing more about your story, Alyssa, our SPN colleague, gave me a little brief introduction. So we'll read that now, just to so others can hear more about you. Ariane, the founder of Hype Academy, lends contagious energy to everything she does and always brings her best. She has now been an advisor at Launchpad, spoken a panel for us at annual meeting, and being a project owner and entrepreneur herself, always bringing a bright smile and positive attitude. She is so kind, so humble, and ready to find the silver lining in every single plan she has. And we're so grateful to have her here on our podcast. So, Ariane, thank you again. And let's hear more about you. Can you tell me a little bit more about your background? How did you grow up and how did that shape you?
Oh, wow. Wow. How much time do we have, James? Because
We have as
but I
much as
do
you're able to give us.
wow. I do want to say thanks just to Alyssa. I'm sure she's listening. Just thanks for that introduction. I absolutely appreciate it. I am based, of course, in New Orleans, Louisiana. I am number eight of my mom's eight kids. And I was born, she was 38 actually when she had me. So I was born later in her life, and it was not the easiest upbringing. Of course, growing up in poverty, basically, to my mom, who was a domestic abuse survivor, also mental illness
Hmm.
survivor. And it was very tough financially growing up, but we had a lot of love, a lot of dysfunction too. And there are a lot of families that can you mix that dysfunction with love. And my mom was one of those people. She was a teacher's assistant or a paraprofessional, a para educator for about 23 years. And that was most of my educational career.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I learned from my mom, although it went unspoken, it's not like she overtly said, education is your way out. But I
Hmm.
learned that by how she valued, to see
Hmm.
what she valued. There were times when we would walk or catch the bus to a library that was miles away from our home. And she would take myself and my two closest siblings in age, my two sisters, and she would take us to the library. We would read books over the summer specifically, and we would do book reports for my mom. And that was one way that she showed me through all of the dysfunction, through all of the challenges that we experienced in our home, that one way to overcome, one way to transcend poverty was going to be through education. And I think she was my first influence as it relates to becoming an educator.
Hmm. What did she see about education? What was it that really, uh, like that gold that she saw?
Yeah. I can only speculate because unfortunately, my mom passed in 2019. She
I'm
had
sorry.
dementia, Alzheimer's for about 10 years. My sister and my siblings, we helped to take care of her during those 10 years. So I can only speculate maybe what she saw in education that was so freeing and so
Hmm.
liberating. I would have to take it back to her upbringing.
Hmm.
She actually grew up in rural Mississippi, in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, which is outside of Jackson. She grew up picking cotton with her grandfather.
Wow.
And so my great grandfather, Matt Powell, migrated, of course, like many of us, through the Carolinas and ended up in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, and had some acres. and would farm those acres and sharecrop those acres. And my mom would help to pick cotton.
Wow.
And I believe that her having gone through that experience helped her to see what would be most important, using our brains, using our mental capacity, versus having to be subjected to using our physical, our bodies to make money, our bodies to be free, our bodies to build wealth. And I think that that was the main thing. She just saw the value in making sure that we had the mental capacity to make it out of the situation that we were in, the neighborhood, the ghetto, basically.
Seems like education equaled liberty, equaled freedom. It's
Absolutely.
something that I've been really trying to figure out a little bit. These podcasts, it's more me learning more than, and I hope our audience hopes learning, but it seems like our definitions of liberty and freedom are so different these days from one person to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that definitely helped to shape me,
Mm.
in knowing what liberty, what freedom is having something that nobody's able to take away from you.
Yeah.
And that would be your mental capacity, education, knowledge, being able to apply principles. And then I think that that was major.
When you were finding that goal, that, seeing education that way so young, what sort of like what subjects did you like? What kind of things did you like doing as a young child, being excited about education?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed reading. I
Hmm.
thoroughly enjoyed reading, probably because it took me to a different world. It gave me, I'm an introvert, so a lot of what I do now, I have to rest after because it really does take a lot of energy for me um, to be open, and although I enjoy it when I'm doing it, it does take a lot out of me. So I am that person who'll sit and will read. I usually set a goal. Like last year I did about 75 books, so that was one of the subjects that I absolutely enjoyed reading. And then of course English writing. I found out from one of my teachers early on that I didn't really like science. I didn't know I didn't like science, but she could tell by, I guess, the effort that I put into that subject. But I definitely liked reading and writing.
A person after my own heart then. I That was my favorite too, growing up. I found that. What were some of your favorite authors as like a high school and then college?
Oh, um, Toni Morrison definitely is one of my absolute favorite authors. She is amazing, vivid. I also enjoy, now, I do have to say that much of what I read now is self-help. And I'm working on, becoming a little more imaginative as I was when I was a kid.
Hmm.
But so I do a lot of self-help now. But Toni Morrison, I think, would be my favorite author when
Okay.
it comes to
I'll
just
look her up.
falling into a book.
Thank you. I'll look her
Yeah.
up. That's great. I've never read any of her work, so
Oh, you got to.
she's gonna go on the list right
You got
after
to.
your books, though. And
Thank you.
it's amazing to me though that um you do so much. I've listened to some of your podcasts now, and I've seen all the amazing things that you've done, not just with SPN and Launchpad, but all the other things. But you're an introvert, and this is jumping a little bit ahead, but how do you find the energy to do all, if that, as an introvert, I understand that drains a lot to do all
Oh,
of
yeah.
those social things.
Oh,
How do you
yeah.
find the energy to do that?
That's a great question, James. I prioritize self-care. I prioritize rest. I am very, very heavily scheduled. So I am, and that allows me to give myself time to just do nothing. So I'm usually up at about three in the morning, especially on weekdays specifically. I'm up at about three, and I have my day scheduled out. And then in the evenings, that is my time to rejuvenate, recuperate, rest, maybe go to an event that I enjoy, maybe go to out to happy hour with a friend, things like that. Making sure that I invest in body work, going to get massages, going to get spa treatments, those kinds of things. Traveling with my husband. Um, so I make sure that I work hard, work smart, but work a lot, and then schedule in time to take care of myself mentally and spend time with my family, which is probably one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's great to have those things that recharge you.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I'm definitely going to take notes of that and try and apply them into my own life. That's so
You
thank you for
should,
that.
but you got babies too. So
That's right.
you got babies, James. So, do as much as you can. But yeah, you've got 18 years of making sure that they're a priority, but you can squeeze yourself in there just a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Jumping back to your story. So you were a young child growing up and you were seeing education as a way of freedom and education as a way of liberty. And can you take me back to, let's say, graduating high school and then going to college? What was on your mind and what path did you see for yourself?
Well, I finished from an all-girl Catholic high school here in the city, St. Mary's Academy, and uh, the path at the time, let me back up just a little bit. Since fourth grade, I've always wanted to be a teacher. I've wanted to be a teacher since I walked into my fourth grade teacher's class. The late Mrs. Flora G. Weber. She had such an impact on me that first day of class that at that moment, I said, okay, this is what I want. I want to do this. I want to make kids feel the way she made me feel that day. So, leaving high school, I graduated in the top 10% of the class. And I went to school. I went straight to Dillard University to get my undergrad, but I was afraid to declare my major as in education. And I was afraid because I kept hearing how teachers are underpaid and overworked and not appreciated. So it took me a semester to kind of find my way. I went into vocal music, which is something that I enjoy as well. I enjoy singing. So I went into vocal music, and with the education piece being kind of secondary. And then after that first semester, I fully declared that I was going to be an educator, elementary and special education, which is what my mom, her specialty was as well. But my goal there was, and I was going to be the first one. I'm number 8, but I was going to be the first one to graduate from college, and I ended up being the first one of my mom's children to graduate from college. So a lot was riding on my success, my accomplishing this feat, this goal. Um, I was sharing with one of my nieces the other day that I didn't have a lot of, although my mom was in education, she wasn't fully aware of all of the opportunities that might be possible, whether it came to scholarships and financial aid and all of those. So I was kind of on my own when it came to preparing for college. Like the high school that I went to, they required that we put in so many college applications, which was great because otherwise, I don't know that my mom would have known what to do because none of her kids, none of us had ever attended, had ever finished. But I went into college with the mindset that I had to do this if I was going to, in a sense, change my family tree.
That sounds like a lot of pressure. That
Yeah,
sounds like it could be. Was that a lot? Tell me more. How did you deal with that?
it was a lot of pressure, but I was accustomed to it
Mhm.
because um, growing up, I was always the straight A student. I was always the honor roll student. So I was accustomed to being the individual in my family unit that succeeded, if that makes sense. So academically, I was accustomed to that pressure. But now that I look back as an adult, as a 44-year-old, I look back and I see that it also reinforced some beliefs that I'm still unraveling about myself. as it relates to perfection, having to be perfect, having to do it perfectly. And it's not that I don't believe it's that my mom intended that to make me into. I'm already type A, and I know that that's how I'm wired. But I think it reinforced the belief that if I can't do it perfectly, then maybe I shouldn't do it. So in college, I was accustomed to the pressure, so I did what I needed to do to finish, and I finished with honors. But I look back now and I think that there were some things that were cemented and reinforced that maybe weren't as healthy, and I'm still unraveling some of those things.
Well, you definitely, this wasn't my experience in college, but I know that a lot of people in college, it's more of a fun times thing. It doesn't sound like that was your experience either.
Oh, no, no way. I was doing work study. I was working a job for a time until I just couldn't. And I did have one joy outside of class because I didn't party. I didn't go to events or anything like that. I didn't hang out in the dorm. I went to school here in the city, so I still lived at home. But college for me was the concert choir. We would travel, and that was one way I was able to travel. I started traveling with our concert choir. We would take a tour across the country every spring, and we would sing in churches across the country. And I was a part of the concert choir, but I also auditioned for and got the mezzo soprano role in the female quartet, which was an extreme honor. So that was my fun. That was my party.
Wow. Uh, I've heard in your podcast you refer to other people as multi-hyphenates, and you definitely qualify as that. Wow, not just
Multi hyphenate. Yep. Look
that's
at you. You
amazing.
have done your research, James.
Well, I feel like the amount of time that I spent could have just been easily quadrupled, and with someone like you, I'm just so grateful. So tell me though, speaking back to the research, after you
Mhm.
graduated, it looked like you just jumped in and started being an educator. What was that like?
I did. I did. I jumped right in, finished from Dillard in '01. Now, that summer, as soon as I finished from Dillard, by that time, I was also married. I got married the day after my junior year ended. So I was married my senior year of college. And I went straight to the University of New Orleans to get my master's that summer. So as soon as I finished from Dillard, I went to UNO, but I also started teaching.
Mm,
And I will say that of course I went in with all of the training that I had gotten at Dillard, and I had done student teaching. I had been offered a full-time position as a long-term sub because the person who I was helping with student teaching, she unfortunately took sick and they needed a replacement. And I'll say that once I started teaching full time, I absolutely hated it. I hated, I hated it.
mm,
I hated waking up in the morning to go to the job.
mm,
I absolutely loved my kids.
mm.
I loved the seeing the light bulb go off. I loved seeing them um, interacting and growing and taking on some and building character. I loved it. What I did not love was the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And my very first position was what we called a 4.5 transition teacher. And so that was, and I know it sounds odd,
Yeah.
4.5 is the middle between fourth and fifth grade. So these are kids, I got the kids who had failed the statewide test. Uh, they failed it in fourth grade. They
Mm.
failed it the summer after fourth grade, and then they came to me instead of being held back in fourth grade. So they came to me, and my job the entire year was to prepare them to take the test again.
Oh my.
And it was absolutely um, the exact opposite of what I thought teaching should be. I
Well,
thought teaching should be more about experiences and growth and relevant. uh, relevant experiences specifically. And I felt like I was teaching to the test. And that was part, it just did not, it went against what I felt at my core was my mission. And that's why I say I hated it. I hated getting up for those 2 years that I did 4.5.
Hmm. Had you already thought about founding your own academy and like shape, because, or is that where this came from? This
This
idea?
is it was a buildup of years.
Hmm.
It started with I hate it. I hate it.
Hmm.
So what I did was, because I am a fixer, I am, like I said, I'm type A. So if there's an issue, I want to get it fixed, right?
Right.
So those first 2 years, I said, well, maybe it's because I'm in Orleans Parish, which is we traditionally, historically had failing schools
Hmm.
in this parish, and most of our schools were struggling, but we are about 20 minutes away from what was at that time the number one parish in the state. Of course, we have parishes in Louisiana, whereas you all have counties.
Yes.
And so I lived about 20 minutes away from the top parish in the state. And I said, well, maybe if I go to the top parish, I'll have a better experience.
Hmm.
So it was highly, highly competitive. I applied. We had to go to our interviews, and I got the job. I got a job teaching in the parish. And I said, okay, so now I'm going to really experience what it means to teach, what it means to enjoy teaching. And it didn't get any better. I was one of the only in this particular parish. So in my first parish, it was predominantly African American, Black and brown children of color, as well as the educators. The parish that I moved to, was predominantly non-brown, non-white, non-black, excuse me. And I was one of the only African American teachers in the school. Most of my kids were not African American.
Hmm.
And if you know anything about the South, and I'm just going to be honest about living and growing up in the Deep South, I just told you my mom picked cotton on,
Yeah.
with my great grandfather. Some of what we believe, which are some of the beliefs that I'm still unraveling, is that sometimes we believe that the issues in our community are specific to our community, the
Hmm.
Black and brown community, that they don't exist outside of the Black and brown community. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Yes.
So when I went to this new parish, my thoughts were, okay, well, they've got more resources and maybe it's going to be a better situation. But it was the exact same. It wasn't
Hmm.
about skin color. It wasn't about ethnicity. It was about what I call academic malpractice. Our
Hmm.
kids, all of our kids, Black kids, brown kids, white kids, all of them, in my opinion, were being set up to fail.
Wow.
And it was because of the way the system was set up. The system
Wow.
was set up to help them to pass a test when many of them couldn't read, couldn't write, didn't know their mom's last name, didn't know their own address. So just some of those basic fundamental things that kids should know. And I went to this parish and I spent about 3 years in the parish, and then Hurricane Katrina hit.
Hmm. I remember that.
But by the time Hurricane Katrina hit, I was really struggling because I was still having a lot of the same issues with trying to um, trying to give what I felt like was my duty, which was helping kids to grow, helping kids to learn, helping kids to change their family trees. And I did not feel like I was doing a good job. So every day that I woke up, I felt like a failure.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That sounds, especially for the young woman that you describe,
yeah,
um, backbreaking, soul crushing,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
depression inducing. How'd you
Mhm.
get through it?
I got through it. Katrina gave me a little bit of a reprieve. As traumatizing as Katrina was, we literally had water up to our roof in our ceiling in our home, myself and my
Oh,
husband.
sorry.
And so it was traumatizing. We couldn't get to our home for months. We left like August 29th and could not get back into our neighborhood until October. So even with all of the trauma of Hurricane Katrina, it also gave me a little bit of a reprieve to step back and say, okay, what do I need to do?
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah.
And long story short is where Hype came along, Hype Academy. And that's
Mm,
how we decided that I love teaching. I love teaching. I just don't love the vehicle. I don't
mm,
love the box that it's in right now. I don't
yeah.
love teaching in a system where I feel like the kids are being set up to fail. So my goal was that's where Hype was born. That's where the idea of starting my own school came, is because I wanted to fix the situation. I wanted to find out why is it there's this incongruence between how I truly 100% feel about seeing my kids and how they give me life and how I thoroughly enjoy being in their company, but I don't want to go to work in the morning.
Yeah.
So there was a true incongruence that I had to figure out. And I figured that it was because I could not give them what I felt like I had been called to give them, which
Yeah.
was opportunities to experience holistic experiences that were not based on a preset, boxed in, cookie cutter approach.
Sure. I mean, you wanted to provide that opportunity,
Yeah.
but seriously, like what I heard from the beginning is that education is something, like you said, no one can take it away from you. It's something that fundamentally changes who you are. And what you're giving, or what you were forced to have to give these students, was something that could be taken away with a snap of a finger. It's, a piece of paper. That piece of paper is something that's not that's nothing has nothing to do with your soul. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you take away standard test, obviously.
Yeah.
That's not the solution in my mind. But how did it come to that, where it was always, or not always, where it was all about just that piece of paper? Do you have any sense of that?
I want to say that it has to do with one, the national trend. Every especially during this time, that's, and I'm sure even I can remember being in third grade and having to take the Iowa test. So there was always something. We're competing with other nations, we're competing on a national level. So the trend was moving toward, we've got to figure out why the United States of America is not at the top of the list when it comes to achievement
Hmm.
in specific areas. So I know that it was a heavy push toward finding solutions in this in that sense. Um, and then if we could double down on that when it came to like the state of Louisiana. So the state of Louisiana also historically is toward the bottom
Hmm.
of list when it comes to achievement in the areas, basic areas, reading, math. So I think the pressure was on from the top,
Hmm.
and the pressure just trickles down, and it trickles down all the way from the superintendent to the school leaders to those of us that are in the classrooms to our kids to their families. And it just was not a healthy, um, the mandate was one thing, but the approach was not a healthy approach, because not every child is capable of passing and doing well on a standardized test.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to a standardized test that is not necessarily, and I agree as well, there has to be some sort of testing, but inherently many of our standardized tests were not they were not normed for the kids that we serve.
Hmm.
So many of our kids, the tests that they were being given, there were vocabulary terms that they just were not familiar with because of the region we live in, because
Interesting.
of their experiences, because of culture.
Yeah.
So you talk about, having a mandate come down, a national mandate, and then we just kind of box it and say, okay, everybody's got to do this thing. And I think that that was part of it. The frustration was forgetting that we are dealing with, in these seats, living, breathing human beings.
Yeah.
And we've got to be able to um, we've got to be able to adapt our assessments to meet the needs of those human beings that we serve.
Yeah. It's a little bit of what we talk about a lot here in SPN about how this strong central hub that dictates everything that has to be done at all the disparate parts of the country doesn't work quite so well. There needs to be
It
a little bit
doesn't.
of that federalism idea.
Absolutely. And then when you tie dollars, oh,
Mm,
when you tie dollars to it, it just makes it that much more difficult to unravel and to make sense of what it is that we're
right.
expecting teachers and kids to do in the classrooms, because at the end of the day, that it all trickles down
Yeah.
to what goes on a daily basis in that classroom on the front line. And then you couple that with lack of resources in schools. So the frustration just mounds. It just continues to build because you couple that with frustration from lack of resources. You couple that with low teacher pay. Couple that with all of the things that come along with having kids. I was in right when Katrina hit, I was in a classroom that I was not qualified to teach, but had been asked to do it for the team because
Mhm.
someone had left. So when I started in the parish that I moved to, um, I was doing what I had been trained to do, which was a SPED resource class. So I was the teacher that pulled kids out of the class and provided additional resources, and I loved it. I was writing grants and getting additional money to implement additional programming, and the teacher for the students with behavior disorders quit mid-year, and they asked me if I would take the class just for
Mm.
the remainder of the year so that they could we until we could find somebody, and I agreed. Of course, I'm a team player. I'll take the class. And but I was not qualified to hold on to that class. And I have one, I always wonder, where is she? Where is she? I had one baby, she had been so traumatized. She was traumatized by, she had been abused in the past by school personnel. And she had been, and I believe she also maybe had some mental illness now that I look back. And like she would literally use the restroom, defecate, and then she would wipe it on my desk, and she would wipe it on the walls, and she would leave the class and wipe it on the halls. And I was not qualified to to serve her. Yet when I came back the next year, after they promised they would put me back where I was qualified, they gave me the class again. And that is so those mandates coming down, the money being tied to it, and there not being enough resources and qualified people, qualified staff, team members, it leads to frustration, which of course, if you think about the mass exodus that's happening right now in education, I know firsthand, and that was 15 years ago for me, 15 plus years ago for me. And it still is very heartbreaking to know that I was in that class, qualified teacher, but not qualified to help that particular student.
Wow. I would not, I, I don't know how you managed those two. That sounds like back to back, just constant,
Yeah.
incredible frustration and fear is what I would,
Yeah.
goodness. So
Yeah.
how take us from that moment, which sounds like a low moment,
Oh,
to where you're, you see a path and you've taken a plunge and you've started to implement solutions within
yeah.
your community.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a definite it was a low moment, but that's usually, what God does. I know specifically with me is he uses those moments to birth in us or birth in me what's next and what the solution is. And so we had after Katrina, we had a set of twin girls who were being homeschooled, and I say that loosely, by their aunt in post Katrina New Orleans. So if you think about post Katrina New Orleans, we were maybe the first ones back in our neighborhood. All right, so we're back in our neighborhood, but we're living in a trailer in our driveway. So we've got, as neighbors are coming back, there are trailers because none of our homes are livable in our community. There are no birds chirping, like literal, if I could paint the picture, no birds chirping. We don't hear, there are no mosquitoes, there are no animals roaming the streets. And I would literally see alligators on my way to work in the morning, but there are no animals in the street. The trees are all dead, all of the vegetation is dead. Um, no street lights. We had absolutely no street lights. So it's pitch black at night. So the schools had not come back to the city. We didn't have any open schools. So as we began to rebuild one house at a time, we bought a house and we rented the house out, and we happened to rent it to a family that had a set of twin girls. And the family, the girls were being homeschooled by their aunt, but really what they were doing during the day was they were baking cakes and doing hair and not necessarily getting the academics that they needed. So mom and dad were like, please, please, please. I know, you, because at this time I was just frustrated with teaching. And they were like, please, 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 can you just homeschool the girls for us? And I said no for a long time. I had actually, by this time, I had left that parish and I just went into real estate. I got my real estate license, started doing real estate, but I never left teaching in my heart. And, she asked me over and over. And finally I said, okay, I'll do it. And I did it. And we did it for about a year and a half. And then it was like, let's make it official. And we decided from that point, and it's a long story, but we decided from that point that we would call it Hype Academy. So helping young people excel academy. We picked up more students. We eventually moved into a brick and mortar, and 12 years later, this past spring, we graduated our 12th graduate. I know that was
Congratulations.
a big fast forward, but
Well, tell me though, jumping back,
yeah.
what was it that made you say yes? Because that seems like that's a big moment right there. You saying no, 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 and then finally you get the yes. Can you walk me through that?
Yeah. Um, I am a firm believer in walking out your calling. You've got to be doing what you've been called to do. So, real estate, as fun as it was, as lucrative as it was before that '09 crash, um, it wasn't my primary passion. And I believe that passion is given by God, like it is divine. I believe that passion is divine. So I believe that I would have always wondered, there would have always been something missing if I had not said yes eventually. If I believe that I got out of my own way, right, and said, despite how I'm feeling about the education system right now, I know that this is something that I need to do, right? So, and part of needing to do it is because back to fourth grade, first day, back to the library with my mom, there are two women who gave me the gift of education, who freed me. And I knew that it was it's my, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help free young people.
Mhm.
And that's where the yes came from. The yes was, it was more, um, if I say no, I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying no to my purpose.
Mhm.
And that just doesn't work. It's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like I've heard this from other members of our little network in the past that gratitude really does do wonders for actually going out and accomplishing things. And I heard a lot of gratitude there where you're speaking back to, the gifts that you've received and now you're able to give them to others. And I think that's
Absolutely.
beautiful, incredibly moving. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing
Thank
that.
you. Yeah. Gratitude. It's, and I didn't even think of it in that sense, but definitely gratitude. There's what better way to say thank you than
Mhm.
to give that same gift or better to somebody else? What
Mhm.
better way?
Absolutely. What is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So I know that you fast forward a little bit, I'm sure. And speaking of fast forward, this hour has just sped by that I feel like it's gone so
James, we
fast.
gotta do it again. We gotta do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't, I don't know if we scratched the surface, did
And we
we?
didn't. We did it. Do you have a
Oh,
few minutes to go over?
okay.
Do you have a few minutes? I know. Do you can we
I've got a few minutes. I've got a few
Okay,
minutes.
great.
Absolutely.
So thank you. So tell me,
Yeah.
you you have graduated, you're some of your students now, but I also know that you're in a period of transition with Hype, and you have a fascinating new project that you're starting
Hmm.
called Cash Academy, which I
Yes.
think is brilliant. Can you share more about this transition and then about what this new project is?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Cash Academy, and I'll fast forward, that's another fast forward.
Mm,
Cash Academy was born out of this transition. So, we started Hype Academy Private School in 2011 officially. We started unofficially in '09 with the twins, and we started officially in 2011. And for the last 12 years, up until this past spring, we have been a brick and mortar private school serving hundreds of kids here in the city of New Orleans. And we decided that it was time to shutter the brick and mortar and move into something that could provide more impact. And prayerfully, and with the help of SPN and the wonderful staff, and I can't even begin to say how grateful I am for the staff at SPN. Through Launchpad, we've created a project called Cash Academy. It's a project of Hype Academy. So although the private school is now, we don't have a brick and mortar private school anymore, Cash Academy is our answer for impact. So it's a
mm,
financial literacy app that we're developing for Black and Brown youth specifically. So those kids between the ages of 13 and 18, we're finding that even here in Louisiana, financial literacy is now being mandated. And it's slow. It's about 22 states right now that are now mandating financial literacy be a part of the high school experience,
that's great.
but it's not necessarily being funded.
Mm,
So it's one thing to mandate, but it's
yeah.
another thing to fund what's being mandated. So Cash Academy has a twofold goal. One is to develop an app that provides culturally relevant financial literacy courses to young people. And of course, it's got to be fun, it's got to be entertaining. So we're developing it in with the sense that we've got to make sure that the kids are enjoying being on the app. And we're also putting together an advocacy piece so that we've been in touch with Representative Muscarella, who is the one who authored the bill that passed here in the state of Louisiana. So we've been in touch just trying to make sure that the things that are being mandated are being funded. So twofold, we're developing the app, which is Cash Academy, and then we are working on getting some things done legislatively so that we can make sure that it's being funded and kids like me, like when I grew up not knowing much about money. I knew we had money when it was time to go to the mall. When mom said, "Come on, let's go." That's how I knew. And it wasn't often. It wasn't often, right? But that was our relationship with money. And I knew we didn't have money when mom would say, "Go ask the neighbor if I can borrow $5." Right.
Mm,
So that was part of my experience growing up. And I want, of course, in the same spirit of freedom and that same spirit of liberty and liberation, I believe that one of the things that our kids are truly missing is access to financial literacy tools. And that, in and of itself, could change the trajectory of generations to come.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand when you say it's culturally relevant? What
Mhm.
does that look like?
So we're still in the development phases, but what it looks like is in our as we develop it is they're gonna hear from people that look like them,
Mm,
that believe in some of the things they believe in, that dress the way they dress, that come from the places they come from. So these kids within the app, if I could speak specifically from the standpoint of New Orleans, they may see a Mardi Gras Indian giving financial literacy tips or helping to weave financial literacy in to what it is that they do for a living.
Yeah.
So these videos will be financially, the videos and the content, all of the content will address specifically those kids who are usually not considered specifically when it comes to building content that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's two things that come to mind when you say that. The first thing is you're recognizing the need for community. That
Yeah.
if someone is just picks up some sort of information that's completely outside of our little circle that we live in, our little world, then that information doesn't appear relevant. But
Yeah.
if you are have something that's within my community, like this is someone I respect that's coming and telling me something, then all of a sudden you can see that applied more easily to your own situation, which makes sense, completely
Yeah.
makes sense. And then the other thing that I hear too is like, okay, we're gonna speak in language that you understand. You know, we're not gonna come at you with this, what you mentioned earlier, a vocabulary that's completely irrelevant to my whole world, my whole life has been up to now. So that's
Hmm.
huge. That makes complete
Yeah.
sense.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's critical because we are competing with so much.
Yeah.
We're competing with the TikToks and the Snapchats, and we're
Yeah.
competing, right? We're competing with the video games, and so we have to draw them in. And what usually draws us in? People who look like us, who
Mm.
sound like us, who matter to us, right?
Yeah.
So it's a matter of making sure that they are receiving or have a better chance of engaging with the material, which makes it more likely that they're going to learn the lessons
Yeah.
and use them to create generational wealth, because that's one thing in our community that's lacking, is that building of generational wealth.
Mhm.
We've got there are a lot of reasons. um, of course, if we start doing history lessons, there are a lot of reasons that many of us are the first. We're just beginning to build generational wealth,
Right.
and many of our kids, they don't have a chance because their parents are not necessarily savvy. So we've
Mhm.
got to get to them any way possible.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes complete sense. Wonderful. Beautiful. Okay, well now we're really starting to go over. So I just want to try and sum up some of what we've spoken about. So tell
Hmm.
me, through this fantastic, vision that you have now, what
Hmm.
are some of the big goals that you have that you want moving forward that we can all be like saying, okay, this is where Ariane is going.
Ooh, that's a big deal. Some of the big goals, of course, are to get the app in the hands of. We're starting in the Deep South, so we're starting here, right in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. So we're starting here, but the big goal is to get the app and the corresponding curriculum into the hands of kids across the country.
Okay.
Still culturally relevant and still making sense as far as content wise. So that's one thing. We also intend, another big goal is to begin to advocate for the funding. So be responsible for increasing the funding of financial literacy tools, courses, curriculum, beginning in the Deep South and then spreading throughout the country. So those are two big goals that we have, and we actually have some partners that we're working with to get that done. Some partners who are already doing amazing things, who want to walk with us with Cash Academy and embed it into the programming that they're already doing. So I think that those two goals will definitely be reachable to make that national impact, starting with that national impact.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, as you're working through those big goals and then even looking back some to some of the hurdles that you've overcome, which you haven't even told me the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure, but there have been many that you've told me. What keeps you going? What's your inspiration?
Mhm. When I'm going, um, I'll have left my mark. And I'll have left my mark in a way that all those coming behind me, we talked earlier, I don't have any kids. My husband and I, we've been married 23 years, wanted kids, just weren't able to have any. And I think knowing that I was responsible for sparking a movement that changed generations um, in my community and beyond, especially as it relates to eradicating poverty.
Mm.
And poverty is not just about dollars and cents, it's about education, it's about knowledge. My mission is to spark change in my community and beyond. And that's what keeps me going, is seeing the condition of my community and knowing that I am one of the answers.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing and being so generous with your time. I just have one last question. Can you nominate anyone else for me to interview next here on Neighbors in the
Ooh,
Network?
oh, that is real. Ooh, I have two people in mind. I have two people in mind. One I would say her name is Crystal Hardy Allen. She is she's phenomenal. She's phenomenal. She is an educator, school principal turned she does DEI consulting, but she is so much more than that. She wrote a book as well. Her book is I keep it in my car, so it's in my car. But she's phenomenal. And um, Monica Hall. Monica Hall is another educator. Of course, they're educators. Monica is in the Atlanta area, Marietta, and she's phenomenal as well.
Wonderful. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much for those nominations. Those sound
absolutely.
fascinating. Wonderful conversations. I'm sure will come from our chats with them. So thank you very much. And thank you so much for sharing. It was such a generous conversation. I've learned a lot. I have a lot that I can go back and think about. And if you're ever in the Houston area, could we grab a coffee?
Absolutely. Wait,
Okay.
so I got to get your information then, because
Okay.
I'm in the Houston area often, James.
That's perfect. We'll get that offline. So thank
All
you.
right.
And thank you again. It was wonderful.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time, James. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us here on Neighbors in the Network. Thanks for listening to Neighbors in the Network, an offering from the State Policy Network. We hope that this podcast can serve as a place for empathy, understanding, and human connection. Please let us know about your thoughts in the comments section. And thanks again.